So good morning, everybody. As part of the MSSRF Millennium Lecture series, we're delighted to have with us Dr. Regine Andersen. She's from the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, Norway, a Norwegian national. She is currently the Research Director for Biodiversity and Natural Resources, and she is a research professor with extensive experience with governance of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture in both national, international, and local levels. She's been very involved with the implementation of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for food and agriculture. And she is currently here as the leader of a project, Diversifarm India, which is being implemented together with MSSRF, and I was just talking to her probably also in NBPGR, with the support of the Royal Norwegian Embassy in New Delhi. So she will currently be talking to us about farmer-managed seed systems and farmers' rights, promoting seed and food security among smallholder farmers. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gayatri, and good morning to you all. It's great being here. It's great seeing you all. And good morning. And it is a great honor to be invited to give a millennial lecture here at the MSSRF, as I feel connected to the MSSRF in a very special way. Yes, in 2002, I presented my doctoral dissertation, which was at a seminar in Chiang Mai in Thailand. And this doctoral dissertation resulted in this book, Governing Agrobiodiversity, Plant Genetics and Developing Countries. And at this seminar, Professor Swaminathan came in. He came into the seminar room. He sat down in the front row. He folded his arms, closed his eyes, and I thought he was sleeping, but he was not, because he was listening very intensively. And then after my presentation, he opened his bright eyes and asked some very, very interesting questions. And we had a great discussion. And after that presentation and the discussion, I went after him and asked him, what would you suggest that I should do or focus on after my doctoral dissertation? And he said, I suggest you focus on farmers' rights. And so I did. I followed up. I started a project already in 2005, when I was not still finished with my doctoral dissertation. And we did a lot of research throughout the years, surveys, in-depth case studies. We produced a book, Realizing Farmers' Rights to Crop Genetic Resources, Success Stories and Best Practices. And we started a website as a gateway to farmers' rights with lots of information, research, resources of any kind for decision makers, practitioners, researchers, media. A gateway to farmers' rights. We have a few years back we updated it and refreshed it with a new design, and you can see it at www.farmersrights.org. So it was really setting the stage for me, this meeting back then in 2002. And this leads me to today's topic, farmers' rights, of course, and farmer-managed seed systems. So I will talk about, first, what farmer-managed seed systems are, and relation to seed and food security, barriers to farmer-managed seed systems, how they relate to farmers' rights, and to understand farmers' rights and how, or what potentials they actually have. We need also to understand the roots of them, or the history of farmers' rights in the FAO. As farmers' rights have been surrounding with many controversies, I have developed a theoretical approach, so to say, or two approaches to understanding farmers' rights, which I will present. I'll say a few words about negotiations under the plant treaty, options that have been developed and the current state. Before, I would like to use community seed banks as an example of the realization of farmers' rights and come to India as a pioneer in these regards. So it's a full program. I hope you will follow me along the way. I start out with farmer-managed seed systems and relation to seed and food security. And first of all, This might be very well known to you, of course, but what is a seed system? How to define it? Actually, there are many very different definitions in the literature. As I see it, a farmer-managed seed system, or a seed system is a network of actors involved in the development and management of crop varieties and or the production, distribution, use of seed and other propagating material of these crop varieties, and any legal and institutional structures and processes defining these activities. And now we can distinguish between farmer-managed seed systems and formal seed systems, and they are, of course, very interrelated. So formal seed systems, or informal seed systems, farmers buy certified seed of registered varieties developed in scientific breeding programs. They buy these seeds from authorized seed shops. The seeds have been officially tested for optimal quality. The varieties are genetically distinct, uniform, and stable. They have been evaluated for their adaptation to specific farming systems. The seed sources are normally commercial companies or national research programs, and the structures of the systems are defined by law. Whereas in farmer-managed seed systems, farmers save, use, exchange, and sell farm-saved seed. They use local unregistered varieties and locally enhanced varieties in some instances, as well as varieties from modern plant breeding, according to their preferences and the availability. And through seed selections, they may also enhance or diversify the varieties at hand. Exchange and sale normally takes place within the local community and neighborhoods. And as these systems develop from the ground, there is great variation and diversity between and among them. And the systems are normally not defined by law, or their practices are more or less tolerated under the law. So this is farmer-managed seeds, or these are farmer-managed seed systems in a nutshell. Now, there are some pros and cons. In the formal seed systems, varieties are high-yielding under optimal conditions, but optimal conditions can, of course, not be guaranteed. And in marginal areas, in many countries in the global south, that might be an issue. And the seeds are normally of high quality, but in many areas in countries of the global south, seeds are often not accessible because of long distances, or because of that people cannot afford to buy them or to buy the input required to grow them. And they might also not be available for sowing time, which we have seen in many cases. Farmer-managed seed systems, here varieties are adapted to local conditions and climate change. There is little to no effort to enhance and improve local varieties. Only some few community-based initiatives can be we have seen, and there are other initiatives too, but it's very little effort. And the seeds are readily available and accessible in time for sowing, but may be of varying qualities. And thus, since there is no certification, trust is essential. So this is the basics. But then, of course, farmer-managed seed systems have great potentials. And here is an example. This is farmer Ayelo Dinko in Ethiopia. And she's showing a durum wheat variety, a red durum wheat variety, which has been enhanced and developed through a community seed bank in Ejere, Ethiopia. And it is highly nutritious, and what's more, it is also high yielding and can compare to commercial varieties. And that is because they have been enhanced through participatory plant breeding. So this is just an example of the great potential of local or farmers' crop varieties. And often we can see these potentials, particularly through community-based agrobiodiversity management initiatives. So how does this relate to food security, seed and food security in the global south? Now, in Africa, farmer seed systems account for 80% of all the seed that is being used for agriculture. The formal seed system only for 20%. But nevertheless, we can see that almost all efforts in terms of policies and legislation resources of any kind is put into the formal seed system. Whereas most farmers rely on seed from the informal or the farmer-managed seed systems. And so if you want to reach them, you have to reach them there, and that's not happening. In India, the numbers are a bit different, but still, farmer-managed seed systems account for around 40%, but these are, of course, all estimates because we don't know, we don't have statistics to really give the precise figures. So, farmer-managed seed systems are really, really important, particularly among the rural poor. And this is the main source of seed for many smallholder farmers. Access to a diversity of crop genetic diversity is a particularly critical factor for seed security, as it helps farmers adapt their food production to the effects of climate change and to other needs, and to spread the risks of crop failure. And seed security is an important condition for food security among smallholder farmers, because without seed they cannot grow food, so it's quite as simple as that. Now, there are many barriers to farmer-managed seed systems, and to come back to Ayelu Dinko and her precious durum wheat variety, she would wish this variety to be distributed to many, many more farmers in Ethiopia than those in Ejere, but it's not possible because it's not allowed to sell these seeds. They are not registered, and they don't know how to register them. They don't have the capacity to register them. And so this community seed bank is only sharing these seeds among their members, and their members can sell them informally in the seed market, of course. But they're not even allowed then to earn an income from these seeds. So this is one of the barriers to unfolding farmer-managed seed systems and their potentials. So there is a lack of legal space to maintain, develop, and distribute crop genetic diversity in these systems. A lack of an enabling policy environment, policies and institutions tasked with promoting farmer-managed seed systems. There is lack of technical support, scarce access to technologies, information and technical support of different kinds, for example, extension services. Lack of equipment and facilities, storage facilities, for example, and then there is market access, very important. There is a lack of adequate marketing opportunities for farmer varieties, and which is really based in a disconnect between farmers and the market due to what we would say is the structural power of the formal seed system, because the formal seed system is defining kind of the rules for the whole seed sector. So this is a structural problem. So my key message with regard to barriers is that farmer-managed seed systems are largely neglected in policies and legislation, and thus their potential contribution to food and nutrition security and the management of crop genetic diversity are underdeveloped. And we could look at this as a pendulum. So more than 100 years ago, the traditional seed system was dominant. Now the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction. Now almost all focus of policies, legislation, resources, allocation, everything more or less is on formal seed systems, and what we need is a balance to allow both systems to contribute their full potentials to achieving food security. And how to get there? Now, I'm very fond of the work of Alme Kinders, Connie Alme Kinders in the Netherlands, and her group. She found that seed security among smallholder farmers in the Global South is best improved through strengthening farmer-managed seed systems rather than seeking to replace these systems with seed supply from the formal sector. But at the same time, it's very important to draw on competencies and capacity from the formal seed system, for example, to enhancing or improving local varieties and producing quality seed. So this bridge is very important. But the development of farmer-managed seed systems need to be demand-driven and demand-responsive to achieve seed security. And for a seed supply system to be demand-responsive, the existence of multiple types of crop varieties, seed sources, and seed delivery pathways is essential. So how does this relate to farmers' rights? We'll talk more about farmers' rights a bit later, but right now I would like just to say that basically realizing farmers' rights means enabling farmers to maintain and develop crop genetic diversity and recognizing and rewarding them for this indispensable contribution to the global pool of genetic resources and to local and global food security. And realizing farmers' rights could enable a game change, shaping a bottom-up farmer-led and demand-driven approach to seed security to balance the current dominant top-down supply-side approach, and thereby developing the potentials of farmer-managed seed systems to contribute to global food security on an equal footing with the formal seed system. This is possible, but it depends on whether and how farmers' rights will be realized. And since farmers' rights are surrounded with so much controversies, we need to go back in the history to see how this all came about, to understand them. So I would like to say a few words about the roots of farmers' rights in the FAO. Actually, we could say, of course, there are many ways to start this story, but we could start by the 1970s with a situation where modern agriculture had wiped out so many varieties of crops, and there were accelerating collecting missions taking place, and 85% of the collections were stored in industrial countries. And then there was this NGO representative from RAFI, Rural Advancement Foundation International, which is now the ETC group, Pat Roy Mooney. He wrote the book Seeds, a small booklet actually, Seeds of the Earth, a private or public resource. And he made aware of this situation and he raised it. He warned that collections would serve private interests, and this gave a decisive push for the FAO to take action. So he actually contacted the Mexican delegation to the FAO, and they warned FAO, suggested to prepare elements of an international convention to solve this situation, and that was in 1881. And already in 1981, and already in 1983, they were quick back then. So later, these things took much more time, but this took only 2 years. The FAO International Undertaking on Plant Genetic Resources was adopted with the objectives to explore, preserve, evaluate, and make available crop genetic resources. And the basic principle was that genetic resources is a common heritage of mankind. But the main problem was that central states didn't want to join the undertaking, since this principle was not seen as compatible with plant breeders' rights. So this is how it's kind of started. And then comes Professor M.S.Swaminathan, and he facilitated the discussions at the FAO back then in different capacities and helped bringing farmers' rights at the table. It came up in this context in the 1980s, I would say in 1986 actually. I've gone back to all the different minutes from the different meetings in the 1980s, and first mention of farmers' rights was in 1986. And it was then taken up as a counter-move to increase demand for plant breeders' rights and to draw the attention to the unremunerated innovations of farmers that were seen as the foundation of all modern plant breeding. And in 1987, the principles, or some principles, were suggested in a working group under the FAO that formed a foundation for all further negotiations on farmers' rights. There should be a recognition of farmers' contribution. There was a need to reward farmers for their contribution. The rights holders were not to be single farmers, but to be communities, or even better, to be entire peoples. So the right holders should be entire peoples. And farmers and plant breeders' rights were to be developed simultaneously, seeking a balance. Later came the Keystone Dialogues, which were chaired by Professor Swaminathan and facilitated a common ground, which led to the first formal recognition of farmers' rights in 1989 by the FAO conference, where farmers' rights were kind of defined as the rights arising from the past, present, and future contribution of farmers in conserving, improving, and making available plant genetic resources, and stating that these rights are vested in the international community as trustee for present and future generation of farmers for the purpose of ensuring full benefits to farmers and supporting the continuation of their contribution to the genetic pool. So all this was still based on the common heritage of mankind principle, which is basically a principle that you could relate to a stewardship approach to managing these resources and a stewardship approach to understanding farmers' rights, and I will come back to what that means. But then started another era, which we could perhaps relate to the ownership approach of crop genetic resources and farmers' rights. Because in 1991, well, first of all, an FAO resolution established that the principle of common heritage of mankind is subject to the sovereignty of states. So that was a blow for the undertaking. And then also the same year, a new version of the Convention of the Union for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants, UPO, came out, was adopted. It was much stricter. So intellectual property rights were taking more shape. And negotiations were ongoing already since 1986 to establish what was to become the World Trade Organization, with agreements on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, TRIPS agreements, which stated that WTO members were to protect plant varieties by either patents or effective sui generis systems, which were not defined then, or a combination. So there was this ownership approach being developed through intellectual property rights regimes, which then actually influenced the negotiations which led to the Convention on Biological Diversity. Because the negotiations of the Convention on Biological Diversity was initially meant to safeguard conservation and sustainable use. There was no talk about benefit sharing and regulating access and things like that. It came after different stakeholders had seen the development of intellectual property regimes. So it can be seen as a kind of forum shopping. So that's how the objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity became conservation, sustainable use, and the equitable sharing of benefits derived from use. And also, it was then, it became a bilateral access and benefit sharing system for genetic resources between owners and users as a response to intellectual property rights. So even the CBD had this kind of ownership approach then, which we will come back to. It was adopted, nevertheless, together with a resolution urging the FAO to negotiate legally binding international regime of crop genetic resources, because this approach of benefits, access and benefit sharing could never be applied to crop genetic resources, because you couldn't find an owner of a variety, or these are shared resources. So another approach needed to be found. And also there was a need to solve the outstanding issue of farmers' rights. So to make a long story short, this, after many, many years of negotiations, led to the international treaty that was adopted in 2001 in harmony with the CBD, but nevertheless with quite different provisions on access and benefit sharing and other things, and it entered into force in 2004. With the objectives of conservation and sustainable use of crop genetic resources and fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from their utilization for sustainable agriculture and food security. Now, farmers' rights in the plant treaty, the contracting parties recognized the enormous contribution of farmers to continue to make the conservation and development of plant genetic resources, and that they continue to make to the conservation and development of plant genetic resources, and which constitute the basis for food and agriculture production throughout the world. And they also affirmed that this is the basis of farmers' rights. And then there is the Article 9, which states that the responsibility for realizing farmers' rights rests with national governments, and it states possible measures to protect and promote farmers' rights, which include protection of traditional knowledge, and the rights to equitably participate in benefit sharing, and the right to participate in national level decision making of relevance, and we'll come back to all of this. And then it addresses any rights that farmers have to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-safe seed without really giving any particular direction. So it states that these are rights, but it doesn't say exactly what countries should do. There are also supportive provisions like the preamble, addressing the importance of farmers' rights and the importance also of promoting them at national and international levels. And there is Article 5 on conservation and Article 6 on sustainable use, and all this is very interrelated. Now, looking back at this history, I would suggest two approaches to understanding farmers' rights: the stewardship and the ownership approach. And looking at the different elements of farmers' rights, we could say that when it comes to the protection of traditional knowledge, there could be two ways to see this. One is to protect knowledge against extinction, and thus to encourage its further use. This is protection by sharing of knowledge. But the other way is to see it as protection against misappropriation, to enable holders to decide over the use of genetic resources. It's quite the opposite of sharing, or it means at least that certain conditions needs to be in place for sharing. When it comes to equitable sharing of benefits from the use of plants or plant genetic resources, under the stewardship approach, these are to be shared between custodians at large, entire peoples, and the society at large. And this can happen through the multilateral system of the plant treaty, through official development cooperation, government support, or through other measures. But under the ownership approach, the idea is that these benefits should be shared between purported owners and buyers upon prior informed consent on mutually agreed terms. And of course, this is difficult for many reasons. It's difficult to find the owners. There might be many owners. And also, those farmers who are conserving specific varieties now, which may be interesting in future, will never benefit from this. So there are really some flaws to this, but this is then the ownership approach. When it comes to participation in decision making, well, it depends a little bit how you see it, but it's important under the stewardship approach to ensure legal space and rewards for farmers, whereas under the ownership approach, it's important to ensure adequate legislation on access and intellectual property rights. And when it comes to farmers' rights to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-safe seed, under the stewardship approach, it's important to uphold legal space for them to freely continuing to contribute to the genetic pool to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-safe seed. Whereas under the ownership approach, it would be rather important to ensure that farmers and breeders' rights are taken care of by enabling farmers to register varieties as incentives to contribute to the global genetic pool. So these are quite different approaches. And the question is, and we can see them, there are different groups which adhere to the stewardship approach and to the ownership approach. And the question is, how can this be combined? Is it possible to combine it? We have provided some examples in our book on farmers' rights, and I will show you a few of those, not too many. But the protection of traditional knowledge. Here is a fantastic potato catalog from Peru, from the Andes. It's showing not only the potatoes conserved and maintained, but also lots of information about them, including markers, molecular markers, and also the farmers who are the custodians of these potatoes. So this is actually establishing prior art. So it's not possible to have intellectual property rights on this material in the way it exists now. And also there is a special clause against misappropriating them in the catalog. And it is a way to share this information. And it's very useful because potatoes are kind of climbing in the Andes due to climate change. So sharing traditional knowledge is very important for farmers to be able to introduce other potato varieties than the ones they used to grow. When it comes to participating in benefit sharing, it is more difficult because you cannot really apply this bilateral approach. So it's more about sharing benefits between the society at large and farmers who are contributing to the genetic diversity. There are many promising approaches here. Most of them are non-monetary, like community seed banks, participatory plant breeding, schemes, seed fairs, festivals, capacity building, reintroducing traditional varieties and population, adding value to diversity, and it needs to be funded through the mechanisms I already suggested. And let's just jump then to farmers' rights to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-saved seed. We have a wonderful example from India, which is the Indian Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act, which ensures legal space for farmers with regard to intellectual property rights and seed laws. So farmers are allowed under the Act to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-saved seed, even of protected varieties under this Act, as long as it's not branded, of course. So this is enabling it might be enabling the formal and farmers' seed systems to make their contribution to the global genetic pool and food security. I'm mixing up a little bit now, sorry. Yeah, so if you combine these approaches, it is possible to do that, and this is the example. However, of course, there are other state provisions in states, which we have been discussing the last week, which may make the implementation of this act perhaps a bit difficult in certain states, but we have not gone into details on that. So when it comes to farmers' rights, a core challenge is that the treaty does not define farmers' rights or oblige countries to specific measures of implementation. But as an international regime, the treaty provides an arena to develop international norms. And that is a very, very important function. And seeking a sound balance between the stewardship and ownership approach is key, I believe, to making progress. And there have been several global consultations and other processes to develop international norms. So the international treaty is an arena for developing these joint norms, and I think that should not be underestimated. So let me show you a few of the consultations. These are this is the first informal consultation on farmers' rights in 2007, organized by the governments of Zambia and Norway and the Fridtjof Nansen Institute. We were 30 people back then, not so many. Then in 2010, we organized a global consultation on farmers' rights. That was then the Fridtjof Nansen Institute together with the Institute of Biodiversity Conservation of Ethiopia, supported by the government. And we were 60 people at this consultation. And then in 2016, Government of Norway and Government of Indonesia and the Secretariat of the Plant Treaty organized this global consultation, and we were 100. So many more people discussing and negotiating around farmers' rights, and this led to the first breakthrough for farmers' rights under the treaty at the Kigali governing body session, governing body session 7, where it was decided to produce an inventory of national measures that may be adopted, best practices and lessons learned from the realization of farmers' rights, so as to inspire the world, so to say, and based on this inventory to develop options for encouraging, guiding, and promoting the realization of farmers' rights as set out in Article 9. And finally, a group was established there had been fights under the treaty for many years to establish a group, and now a group was established. And this group developed the inventory, which you can find at the website of the Plant Treaty, and options for encouraging, guiding, and promoting the realization of farmers' rights. And this was quite a comprehensive work. It was published by the treaty, I think, last year, and it covers 11 categories of measures or options and 32 options with explanations and with examples from the inventory. So it's quite a useful source to understand what farmers' rights can be, how they can be implemented. The first category is about measures for recognition of farmers through prizes and awards, mentioning their names and further details in official records, agricultural heritage system sites, and for the conservation and sustainable use, for example. Category 2 is about financial contributions. Category 3 is approaches to encourage income-generating activities. For instance, to develop value chains, markets for products. Category 4 is about catalogs, registries, and other forms of documentation of crop genetic diversity. To continue, in situ, on-farm conservation and management of PGRFA is category 5, community biodiversity management initiatives, strengthen the role and identity of custodians, guardian farmers, studies on the participation of farmers and communities. And then category 6 is about facilitation of farmers' access to a diversity of crop genetic resources like community seed banks and the like, farmers' seed festivals and fairs, farmers' access to material from gene banks, supporting farmers' own seed systems. Category 7 is about participatory approaches to research, like involving farmers in such research, and development, participatory plant breeding, participatory research. The 8th category is farmers' participation in decision-making at local, national, sub-regional, and international levels. So how to participate in decision-making, like in national advisory committees, commissions, council, and working groups, and also how to organize policy dialogue processes. So it's very comprehensive. The 9th category is training capacity development and policy awareness creation, different measures for that. And then comes the most difficult one, which caused so much discussion in the ad hoc technical expert group on farmers' rights, which developed all these options, the legal measures for the implementation of farmers' rights, such as legislative measures. And so this is the co-chair's proposal, since the ATEG, the group, could not really agree. They were close but could not manage to agree within the short time that was at our disposal. So this is about national legislation and administrative and policy framework relevant for the conservation of farmers, conservation and sustainable use of PGRFA, so realizing farmers' rights in that, and realizing farmers' rights through reviewing and as appropriate adjusting intellectual property law, and the same for seed laws and related procedures, and then to look at national laws for access and benefit sharing and adjust as appropriate also with regard to farmers' rights, and to continue studying national and international policies and laws in this regard. So that's what we ended up with, or the co-chair's proposal, which was supported by many. And there was a last category on emergency assistance. So this is a very comprehensive work, and these are kind of the details of options which can be applied to realize farmers' rights. It's a new platform for promoting the realization of farmers' rights, but how will it be used? That is, of course, up to us and everyone who is engaged in realizing farmers' rights. So the ad hoc technical expert group on farmers' rights is now focusing on assessing implementation It's still ongoing, the work of this group. And the results will be presented at the next session of the governing body, which is in Peru, in Lima, in November this year. But after the options were kind of adopted in the international treaty, there was a global symposium on farmers' rights in Delhi. That was a great experience. Many participants, more than 100, and sharing experiences from the realization of farmers' rights and also promoting the options. So this was a long story about the development of farmers' rights under the treaty. Of course, there are many examples. I would like to highlight one example of how farmers' rights can be realized, and that is community seed banks. And I would first like to show you this continuum for gene banks, or ex situ, or conservation, you could say, conservation of crop genetic diversity. So you could see that community seed banks can be regarded as a missing link between national gene bank and international gene bank and the whole system at that side, and farmers, because community seed banks are arenas where seeds from national gene banks can be multiplied. So if a farmer asks for an accession of seeds from a gene bank, he or she will get only a few seeds. They need to be multiplied, and that is the work happening at community seed banks. So I think community seed banks has a very important place or role to play in this continuum. Now, how do community seed banks relate to farmers' rights? First of all, they are platforms for sharing traditional knowledge, keeping it alive and further developing it. And some become really knowledge hubs. And as for benefit sharing, they are platforms for that as well, because they provide facilitated access to seed diversity, participatory plant breeding if they have, and they develop capacity and livelihoods, many of them, depends on what activities they have. They are platforms for participation in decision making, in breeding decision, in influence of local and national policy and priorities, depending on how they are organized. And they are also platforms for enhancing farmers' rights to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-saved seed, as this happens then within the community seed banks, particularly the first three parts of that. Now, we have had a project prior to Diversifarm India called simply Diversifarm, with the partners from South Africa, Ethiopia, Nepal, Germany, and Norway. And we have carried out in-depth case studies in Malawi, Ethiopia, and Nepal. And we found that well-functioning community seed banks provide platforms for developing the potential of local crop diversity for food nutrition security, among other things through ensuring access to high-quality seed of a diversity of crops. Yes, so it's seed security. Enhancing local varieties according to farmers' preferences. And in addition, they contribute to capacity building, empowerment, and organized access to extension services and other services. And we found that well-functioning community seed banks led to improved productivity, food and nutrition security, and to some extent also to livelihood development. And we studied factors of success, and there are many results of that, which I cannot highlight here because time is not sufficient. But the most important barriers are that it's not allowed to sell seeds, or their most important asset, namely the seeds. So this gives limited outreach in this regard and limited possibilities for generation of funds for their operations. Also, lack of access to technical support when donor support stops, so it's a sustainability issue. And in most countries, there is no or little support through policies and legislation. So there are structural barriers to scaling out community seed banks. So it's really important to continue research in this and to try to find ways to solutions. And here I think it's very, very, very interesting to work in India and with the MSSRF and hopefully other partners on how this could be achieved. Because India is a pioneer of farmers' rights. First of all, India has a great diversity, as we all know. This is from the exhibition at the governing body session that was in New Delhi. It was enormous. And India has shown leadership in the past, as we have talked about. And India shows leadership today. They have been co-chair of the FAO ITPG-RFA expert group on farmers' rights, the ad hoc technical expert group on farmers' rights together with Norway. India hosted the 9th session of the governing body in 2022 and the Global Symposium on Farmers' Rights in September 2023. So there is much political will, and I would say that India is world leading in legislation on farmers' rights, even if there is much discussion around the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. But it is balancing farmers' and breeders' rights, safeguarding farmers' rights to save, use, exchange, and sell farm-saved seed, and provides farmers with many further rights. But as I highlighted, there are developments in other sets of legislation at state level, it seems, limiting these rights. So a question is, how can India continue its pioneering role globally and in international forums, as well as through showcasing farmers' rights in India? I wanted to say a few words about community seed banks in India, because perhaps India is really world leading also in community seed banks. We have tried to count in Diversifarm India, the project. We have now documented, mapped 295 community seed banks. We know of more than 800 community seed banks, and we think the number is much, much higher. So that is really putting India in a leading position in this regard. This picture is from a community seed bank in Bankura district in West Bengal, thanks to Anjan Kumar Sinha for the photo and this photo. And this leads me to our project, Diversifarm India, which we started last year, lasts until 2026. We hope it will be, this can be seen as a pilot project and that we can continue and rolling it out in larger scale. It is about unfolding the potentials of community seed banks for food and nutrition security among smallholder farmers in India through the realization of farmers' rights. And it is designed to strengthen community seed banks and farmer-managed seed systems and farmers' rights in India, and will provide an overview of community seed banks, invite them to share experiences through a joint platform, and seek to develop solutions to joint challenges and identify how best practices can be scaled out. These are the objectives. We are mapping right now, as I said, community seed banks. Based on this mapping, we are developing a typology, also supported by a literature and document review. Based on the typology, we will develop case studies in one state, pilot state, Odisha, to identify success factors. And based on that, again, we will develop capacity building measures and discuss with stakeholders all the way, enabling institutional environments and conducive legislation, policies, strategies, and measures, and try to find out how this could be shaped to support in a sustainable way community seed banks. We will not establish a single community seed bank, but try to find out how they can be strengthened. And involvement and collaboration is very key. We are now discussing how to develop a platform with a GIS map, interactive map, with the information on the community seed banks we have mapped. And there are more things in the pipeline, and of course communication. So we are happily working with the MSSRF on this project. We hope also that the National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources will come on board. They are waiting for clearance. They participated in developing the proposal and are highly motivated, so we just hope it will happen. And there is an advisory group of distinguished people from India, which is really very much supporting the project. we have a website, and thanks a lot to Dr. Balu and the center in Chennai for this very nice photo that we have on our front side. This is a preliminary website. It was supposed to be at the NBPGR website, but since we are waiting for them to become a fully fledged partner in the project, we have this preliminary website where you can already find a presentation of many of the community seed banks that we have mapped and information about the project. So, very briefly concluding and giving a question. Farmer-managed seed systems are vital for seed and food security among smallholder farmers, but farmer-managed seed systems are largely neglected and their potentials are underdeveloped. So realizing farmers' rights is a strategy to unfolding the potentials of farmer-managed seed systems, and their realization is urgent to contribute to reaching the Sustainable Development Goal 2 on food security. And strengthening community seed banks is one way to realize farmers' rights across governance levels, not only at the local, but also at district and national level, and even perhaps internationally. And the question is, how can India continue its pilot role in promoting farmers' rights? And with that, I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
So thank you very much for highlighting the role of farmers' rights and how it's come over the last 2 decades and more. So are there any more questions from anybody in the audience here? I think we also have some people online. So maybe we'll start with the people here. Are there any questions?
I'm not an expert in the field, so thank you very much for a very educative talk and all put together in such a compact fashion. Thank you very much. It just 2 things occurred to me. That it was a wonderful illustration, your table with the tension between the stewardship approach and the ownership approach. Now, in the real world, the ownership approach has kind of taken over, so we have to live with it. But so the way forward, trying to introduce stewardship also alongside, as you pointed out, is a necessity. But don't you think that we need something similar between formal systems and farmer systems? Because farmer systems have strengths, as you have pointed out, but they also lack the ability sometimes to deliver income, productivity, the lack of knowledge to science. And I would say in the context of adaptation, perhaps farmers will meet conditions that are outside their historical experience. So we would need science. So perhaps I was wondering if you had a similar table or you would make one for formal systems and farmer systems like you did for stewardship and ownership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very inspirational. First of all, I fully agree that we need to build this bridge, or the bridge is there already, but very scarcely the bridge between science and farmer-managed seed systems. I think that is key. Also, I think that was a key also in the work of Connie Almekinders, showing that to really unfold the potential of farmer-managed seed systems, there needs to be science into it. But of course, there is also much knowledge among farmers which needs to be taken into account. And a bottom-up approach would be participatory, so it would be kind of a meeting between the two worlds, you could say. But thank you for the inspiration to produce a table. I would consider that. Thank you.
So first, congratulations for an excellent bird's eye view of the situation and how it is involved. I just have a few observations and a question. One is that with respect to the system in India itself, a few thoughts I wanted to share. Quite often there are researchers from the scientific community who make collections of seeds from farmers. About more than 10 years back, I was sent a paper that was to be published in Current Science, which is one of the journals run by an Academy of Science, where more than 60, 70 varieties of paddy had been collected from various parts of Karnataka, and the authors said that they had shortlisted 4 or 5 varieties that may have potential for being drought resistant, flood resistant, and then they're going to register those varieties and do further research. The editor asked me to review, and then I posed a question: was there prior informed consent taken from the farmers when you collected this? Do they know what they're going to do and what's going to happen to that? The editor didn't choose to engage with that question, but there was a shocking or a peculiar aftermath. Dr. Ajay Parida, who was an expert in this area, at the time he was in Swaminathan Foundation, he clarified to me that prior informed consent really arises only in the case of a foreign national. It appears according to our legislation, if you are an Indian national, you can collect, do research and various things without what is called as prior informed consent, which seemed very peculiar, but that remains the legal situation. One other thing is with respect to the National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources, you had spelt out something that could be the ideal case. But today the situation is NBPGR had made collections and continues to make collections from all over the country. But in terms of clientele with which they'll share their genotypes or materials for research, it's only the ICR institutions, agriculture universities and the scientists. As farmer or a farmers group cannot access material from them. This is something that needs to be corrected, I believe. The other thing is with respect to genetically modified crops, we have a peculiar but I think a threatening situation that unlike, let's say, a defective product that's released that may be of a mechanical nature, somebody may defectively release 10,000 models of a car or a mobile phone that's defective and we do a product recall. In the case of GM crops, if there's any problem, there's no such thing as an equivalent of recall. In fact, if you release so many tons of seeds, it may go ahead and multiply and go ahead and contaminate other seeds and all that. This is something which I believe is really a threat to the farmers' varieties, unless they are taken note of in terms of what implications that could have. And lastly, one other thing is in terms of collections that are made and available in international and Western collections, a lot of it was in the post-Columbus period over the last 2 to 3 centuries. What is the status of seeds collected from various other geographies? I don't know the status, but I just recall an incident that more than 10 years back, maybe 15 years back, I had visited the Center for Genetic Resources in the Wageningen University, and they said that the government of Netherlands had made a pronouncement or a policy decision that if genetic resources have been collected from some part of the world, if the sovereign government wanted it back, they'd made a commitment that they'll return it. And they told me that the government of Peru had actually asked them to return collections of potato. I don't know what the current status is, but when you talked about the international situation, it just triggered a question in my mind. I don't know if you have anything to say on this. So thanks for a very informative talk.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think there are interesting issues to discuss regarding the Indian legislation, of course, but I'm not an expert on the Indian legislation, I would say, so I think I could not enter into that discussion right now, but I hope when we have been through our project or have implemented Diversifarm India one more year, we will know more about this. I'm not aware of this Netherlands legislation of giving back genetic resources. There is the legislation on access and benefit sharing under the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is relevant in many countries, but that's of course between countries. So I think I cannot comment more on your intervention, but thank you very much.
So thank you for your presentation. It was really very comprehensive. Since you have Odisha as a case study where you plan to do your pilot for the project, I just thought I'll share an experience of what I've done with documenting seed banks there, community seed banks specifically. This was of course an IFAD initiative in Odisha. And there was a case where the banks had actually they have something called podu cultivation, which is cultivation, where tribes in Orissa shave off a portion of the hillside and do temporary cultivation during lean periods. And they use those as basically to manage food security. So these community seed banks had really helped during the lean period for them to supply food, grain for their basic livelihood. So these are very poor, impoverished communities on the tribal hillsides of Orissa. So this was in Kandhamal district. So probably when you're doing your pilot studies, you could look whether this is still the case, because this was about 10 years ago, and whether these community seed banks has contributed to the reduction of podu cultivation specifically in Orissa. Maybe that could be useful.
Thank you very much. That's inspiring. We will take it with us. Thank you, and I guess we will come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your informative session. I just wanted to understand how the research and development of the institutes help the traditional seed varieties, basically to understand how we profile the nutrition profile of these traditional varieties across the world and compare it with the formal seeds, and if there is any kind of difference in the nutritive profile. So that's something, that leads to food security and nutrition and health. Yeah. Okay, so if I understood your question right, you're asking what kind of research there is there on farm and managed systems varieties and their nutritional profile as compared to commercial varieties or something like that? Yes. And I'm afraid there is not much research. It's not, there is not much systematic research. There are only single cases and not very many. And that's also part of the problem. There is so little research in this. Thank you for raising it.
See, in December 2020, there was a research report published in Nature Reports. It is a collaborative effort involving about half a dozen ICR institutes in India and the National Institute of Nutrition. And broadly, they looked at the nutritional profile of cultivars of rice and wheat of the last 50 years in the post-grain revolution period. And the broad conclusion is that, unfortunately, there's a steep decline in concentration of nutrients like calcium, iron, zinc, and magnesium. And bizarrely enough, to couple with that, there's a rise in concentration of things like arsenic. So the punchline of that publication, which the authors have said, is that in future when cultivars are released, we can't just look at the agronomic properties, but we also have to look at the nutritional profiles. That is what's happened within the last 50 years to the varieties themselves, with the brain.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's very, very important to look into that. Thank you.
So in the meantime, I just wanted to ask you, so is the emphasis on ex situ conservation more, or is in situ also an important aspect of whatever is being designed by the governing body? And the second thing is also, are you looking at crop wild relatives? Because many of the domestication, because you have, like, for example, rice to VD rice transition and vice versa. So many of those, while VD rice, for example, affects yield in farmer fields, and usually that will become an issue with farmer varieties. Are you also, is there an emphasis on conserving crop wild relatives?
Under the treaty?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. So in the treaty there has traditionally been quite much emphasis on ex situ conservation. And also there has been, in the first years of the treaty's existence, the Crop Trust, the Global Crop Diversity Trust, was established, which also significantly supported particularly international centers for with gene banks, the CGR institutions, but also national gene banks. And there has been quite a focus on that. So in the later years, there has been an emphasis to try to increase the focus on sustainable use, which is then in situ, on-farm conservation, you could say, and management, not least, and use of these resources. So there is now an expert group, AXU, Ad Hoc Technical Group on Conservation and Sustainable Use. I'm part of that group. It used to be only working on sustainable use, but we found that it needed to We need to bridge, build a bridge between the two because they are closely interrelated. And this group is now developing guidelines for the conservation and sustainable use of crop genetic resources, or more specifically, to address the bottlenecks. So how to address the bottlenecks, the barriers that we've been talking about today. That's quite an interesting work, difficult. But hopefully we will present something at the next governing body session. And as for crop wild relatives, that's also being addressed. But of course, there's much too little effort in all of these areas, according to what would be needed. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Regine, for your wonderful talk and providing such a beautiful highlight of how farmers' rights are really important and how your work with MSSRF is contributing to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you to all. Thank you.